Yeah, shifting now to Iran, where right now millions of Iranians are pouring into the streets for the funeral of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. It's a 6-day procession that's moving across the country. The Financial Times says the ceremonies are expected to draw somewhere between 12 to 15 million people, which could make this one of the largest funerals in modern history. Now, you may remember that Khamenei was assassinated on February 28th. That was the first day of the American-Israeli war of aggression against Iran, a war that was supposed to deliver regime change. But instead, 4 months later, we're watching, I think, one of the biggest displays of national defiance Iran has maybe ever seen, even as Western media kind of works overtime to downplay it. So, to break this all down and also talk a bit about developments with the U.S.-Iran negotiations, we are joined by the lovely and brilliant Negar Mortazavi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy and host of the Iran podcast. Negar, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you both.
Well, let's just jump right into it. I mean, as I said earlier, millions of Iranians are in the streets right now for this funeral. The Financial Times said it was anywhere between 12 to 15 million people expected to have come over these 6 days, which would rival, it would be basically the largest funeral gathering in modern history. So, just a reminder, this was supposed to be a regime change war. This guy was assassinated on day one, and then Israel and the U.S. systematically went down the list of Iran's leadership from, those first strikes onward. Yet, like I said, 4 months later, here's this huge segment of the Iranian population out there mourning this leader in open defiance of Washington and Tel Aviv, while Western media does try to downplay it, with some skeptics I saw even insisting that the crowds were bussed in or coerced. So, let's start with this. What's the significance of these massive funeral processions, and what are they telling us that the regime change crowd doesn't want to hear?
So, can I just start by what President Trump said, that he was shocked?
No,
He
please.
was
Yeah.
shocked that anyone showed up, and he thought he was hated. And, this is just an extension. I mean, I kind of like the honesty, the very public, portrayal of his honesty. And it's just an extension of how this whole war started. Well, the second war, because it started last year in June, and then they continued, or they revived the war this year, thinking that it's going to be a cakewalk and that we're going to come from the sky with our bombs, bomb schools full of children, hospitals, universities, and then somehow people are going to welcome that and rise up and overthrow this regime. And what we're seeing, these images, is the exact opposite. I mean, this is, of course, the caveat is this is not all of Iran. This is not 90 plus million people. So I want to have, us to maybe discuss this later, but I want to have room for, of course, opposition and dissent. But nevertheless, these are real people. This is a huge political and religious ceremony that's going beyond Iran's borders. It's also going to move to Iraq, to large Shia communities there. Ayatollah Khamenei wasn't just a political figure. He was also a religious leader for many in the Shia world, or at least with respect. And this is sending multiple messages of defiance to an enemy, to two enemies who tried to essentially end this system by assassinating its top leader and his family, members of his family, including a child. It's sending a message of defiance, resilience. Look, we're still standing. Look, we're still popular. And also continuity, that, not only did the regime not fall, not change, it's continuing. We put the house back together. There's a successor. The country is running. And look at this huge, massive event that they planned. It also is a departure from religious tradition, because in Islamic tradition you bury your dead as soon as possible. So this is very, very unusual that it took months because of the circumstances, because of safety, security concerns, wartime. They couldn't plan this earlier, but then they planned it in the month of Muharram, which is the month of mourning for the Shias, and it itself has so many religious connotations. They're adding layers to it: victimhood, martyrdom. And it's just made it even more significant in all of these different ways. So it's a state choreographed event, of course. It's the most important political event since the funeral of the first supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, which was also massive back then. But it has so many other layers of messaging because Ayatollah Khamenei wasn't assassinated in a war by Iran's top enemies. And so this one has many other messages, and naturally so many people showed up, and people, can be in this event for many different reasons. It can be political, it can be religious, it's a big state event, it can even be curiosity. But also what this war did is that it created a rally around the flag effect for supporters of the system, potentially made them more strong and defiant. It also increased nationalism inside Iran, even among parts of the population who are considered as opposition and not happy with the status quo, because people understood that the war was not just the war on the government or the system, this surgical war that was promoted. The war started by attacks on a school full of children. So to think somehow that help is coming by bombing your children in their schools, whoever was disillusioned about that or had other ideas, I think understood that okay, this war was very much a war not just on the Islamic Republic but on Iran and Iranians. And part of what we're seeing is sort of a message of defiance to that idea.
Well, one notable element of this is that Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has not been seen in public since February 28th. The strikes that killed his father reportedly left him with serious injuries. He's been absent from the entire funeral and even his own wife's funeral. So Iranian officials have said he was kept away over fears that Israel would track and assassinate him. And Israel's defense minister just said out loud that he's been marked for death. So what explains this total public absence, and what does it mean for Iranian domestic politics that the new supreme leader lacks the public visibility that the prior one had?
So it's certainly a major limitation, and also it reduces that message of continuity. One big difference was that he didn't hold public office like his father. His father used to be president before he became supreme leader. He also had revolutionary credentials. The first supreme leader was the leader of the 1979 revolution. He was a known figure, religious and political, for years before the revolution. And so both of those, the first and the second, came to the office with already a very high and prominent public profile. And Ayatollah Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei, lacks that. He wasn't a public figure. He didn't hold any office. In fact, he wasn't even seen in public much. So a lot of Iranians don't even know what he looks like. And so this is certainly a limitation. The top reason is, of course, security concern, because he survived an assassination of his father and his family. And so he is the top target for Israel, as the Israelis have also admitted that continuously. So security is the top reason. There's also, I think, maybe secondary image control, because he survived that attack but has injuries. We don't know exactly how, but to have your new leader appear the first time, especially someone who hasn't been known and visible, I think there's also this layer of image control and how you want that leader to first be seen by the public. But certainly this is a limitation. It can't continue forever and has to change. I mean, people want to see their leader, and that's one of the challenges that they're dealing with, while also sending this message of continuity.
So I want to ask you about what has been called by some people a kind of unsettled settlement that we've reached at this point, right? Like, the war isn't what it was in March, obviously. There's this MOU now. There are negotiations, but there are also these intermittent tit for tats, mostly over the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, just recently, I think either yesterday or today, there was more ships that were hit in the strait, I assume by the Iranians. We've seen the Americans have several times bombed the Iranians throughout this negotiation process. And then, of course, the Israelis are still bombing Lebanon, which is like that first point in the MOU. So I guess, how sustainable is all this? And with the American and Iranian positions so far apart as they are right now, what happens when the MOU 60-day deadline hits on August 16th? Like, where do you see this going at that point?
So, Rania, we're at a very messy and shaky stage in between a ceasefire and a final deal. And I think essentially, again, going back to that surprise, the US and Israelis believed that this would be a cakewalk and over in a few days, if not a few weeks, and it wasn't. And so Iran showed that, yes, they can't match the military supremacy of these two powers simultaneously attacking them, but they have cards to play and they played them very strategically. They launched an asymmetric defense, opened new fronts in the war, including Lebanon. They used their nuclear card or their golden card, which is the Strait of Hormuz. Surprised President Trump again because he wasn't listening when they told him this is going to happen. And they essentially forced the other side to accept this MOU. This wasn't something President Trump was happy to do, but nevertheless, they forced them. But it's one thing when you sign that piece of paper. I mean, the MOU is a series of very complicated issues, but essentially has bullet points. And then there's also implementation. So what keeps happening is both US and Israel are trying to push the limits of the understanding or interpretation of the MOU. So, for example, the MOU says that the war has to end on all fronts, including Lebanon. And then the Israelis come out and say, oh, we didn't sign that MOU. Well, the United States of America's president signed on your behalf as their, biggest ally in the region. And so what that means is that pressure, it's a triangle. So pressure has to be put on Israel, who wasn't a party to the MOU, to stop conflict in Lebanon, which they continue to violate, as it has been a pattern of the Israelis before and after every ceasefire, every agreement. They continue to do that. So they're pushing the limits. We know pressure is being applied from Washington. It's just not enough to end the conflict. And the Iranians are trying to triangulate this by telling Washington, and if war doesn't end on all fronts, including Lebanon, we're not going to consider moving forward. And they put the word Lebanon in the first point of the MOU. That's very critical. And they keep circling back to that. Or with the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranians said, okay, we will open this, but the wording is important. It has to be done with coordination with Iran. And then when they open it, the Americans go and try to, create their own route from the Omani side. And the Iranians say no. So they're trying to push the limits, see how far they can get, while also kind of abiding by the MOU, but not real. And then you see conflict. Iran is saying, no, when we say coordination, it has to be coordinated. Anyone passing is going to be attacked. And so making it, pushing back on some of these challenges. So I think we're going to see probably more of that, both in Lebanon, in the Strait of Hormuz, little conflicts, tits for tats, each side trying to sort of highlight or draw the real red lines, and also, their own interpretation and understanding of the various points of the MOU. But the Iranians are also emphasizing that the follow-on negotiations will happen when the MOU is implemented. So that's another push that they're doing with the Americans, that we're not going to just agree with a signature and a lack of implementation and then move forward with the 60 days. So I think that's also a discrepancy between the two sides, because the US side is pretending like everything is going as planned without abiding by every point of the MOU.
And, let's say that war does resume kind of to the level that we saw in March, and it breaks out of this kind of unsettled settlement. Can the U.S. actually accomplish what it failed to the first time around back in March? It has fewer interceptors now, and we've all seen how much leverage Iran has with the Strait of Hormuz, and how easy it is to shut it down and have this impact on the global economy. So, Iran can't beat the U.S. and Israel militarily, but as you've noted, its leverage comes from the asymmetric capabilities and geography. So does that leverage look the same as it did 6 months from now or a year from now?
So exactly as you said, the Iran can't beat them, but they don't have to, because they never had any grand roles of changing the regime in any of these two countries, or occupying an island, or destroying anybody's army. For them, winning is just not losing, because essentially they were attacked and they defended. So that's why winning has been so much easier for Iran, because all they had to do was to not lose. Whereas for US and Israel, they had a list of grand roles and achieved none of them. So is it possible? Yes, I think it's very possible. So we're in a period that I talked about, which also coincides with the summer in the US, 250th anniversary, 4th of July, all kinds of celebrations where, President Trump doesn't want the headache of a war running in the background, and the global energy crisis that was created because of Iran's strategic. I also want to add that it's not just strategy, it's also geography. Iran has the advantage of the home team. They're defending, they're not just attacking. They're the home team. It's a very large country, so there's terrain, there's geography. And then I encourage everyone who hasn't to go look at a map. When we say the Strait of Hormuz, what are we talking about? This very narrow waterway that Iran will always have control over. So to think that you can just go and by military force open that is just a delusion. I don't know if President Trump has looked at that map, but is it
Probably not.
Probably not at the correct spot. But is it possible? Yes. I mean, you have elections coming up in Israel, you have elections coming up in the US. So there's a thinking in Iran that maybe once they pass those seasons, there will be this idea that they can, they have replenished and they can attack again. Thank you for showing that map. You see that very narrow waterway? That's the Strait of Hormuz. Exactly. But is it possible? Yes. But I think it will go most likely as it did in the past. Like the US and Israel will try to do more damage, do more push, because the war didn't start this year. This war started last year in June, 12 days ceasefire, and then they essentially violated that ceasefire by attacking again, this time saying we're going for regime change for real. And then it didn't happen. So will they go again? Possibly. And the Iranians are very much expecting that. But at the same time, they think they have or they want to establish enough deterrence that this mow the lawn situation, mow the grass, doesn't keep happening. And the next time they want to do it, they will think twice.
Yeah, and also there's the domestic political considerations in the US. I mean, there's a window, obviously, like for, I guess, Trump to resume war if he wants to, but that can only last for so long, especially as we see even Republicans in Congress, getting a bit frustrated with this ongoing situation, this ongoing war. But you alluded to this earlier, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand on it. Where does all of this, everything that's transpired, and so much has transpired over the past 4 months, where does it leave the opposition both inside and outside of Iran?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's a very long conversation. I'll just try to simplify it. But I want to sort of counter the narrative that Iranian society is a monolith. It isn't. So you have these, very radical narratives, I would say competing narratives that, I was shocked that anybody showed up. I thought everyone hated him. And then also the opposite narrative that, the entire Iranian society is on the street, which isn't the case. There is opposition and dissent, as we've seen in protest after protest, for various different reasons, a lot of them overlapping. So economy, the state of the economy is very bad, and it's gotten much worse with the war, inflation, prices, all of that is really hurting people. And it's been the core reason for many of these protests. People have political grievances, social grievances. We saw with the women's protest, the uprising 4 years ago. And none of that has been fully addressed by the state. So it didn't go away, but it's been put on hold for different reasons. One is that a big part of the opposition understands that, okay, these wars, these freedom bombs didn't bring freedom. They didn't make things better. They just made it worse. If anyone had this thinking that, maybe help is on the way, as President Trump said. And then if you remember, a few weeks later, he said, actually stay at home because it's not safe out there. And, bombing your children's schools and killing your children at their school, universities, hospitals is not going to make things better. That was fully understood, I think, by a big chunk of the society. And also, opposition didn't go away at the same time. So once this era of war passes, this foreign threat, this massive threat from the outside passes, I think dissent is going to continue, potentially resurface either in the form of protests or whatever. But right now is just, I think it's understood that it's not the time. There's also no space. I mean, I don't want to be, I'm clear-eyed. There's no space, political space for dissent, for public dissent on the street. It's a very securitized space. The state is fighting this foreign war, and they won't allow any form of public dissent or rallies or anything by the opposition. But at the same time, it's also put on hold. You see opposition types who show up to these state rallies, not for the Islamic Republic, all of them, but for Iran, because they understand this wasn't just a war on the Islamic Republic or its leaders. This was a war on Iran and Iranians, on Iranian civilian infrastructure. I've had opposition types, we've heard from opposition types saying, hospitals don't belong to the Islamic Republic, they belong to Iran. Institutions, cultural sites, cultural heritage that existed centuries before any government have nothing to do with any government. They are national treasures of Iran and Iranians, and they were attacked. Or President Trump, multiple times saying, I'm going to go destroy the civilization, which has nothing to do with the government, So I think the war created more nationalism among the entirety of the population, but that doesn't mean dissent went away. It's just on hold, and we're definitely going to see it, especially if the grievances are not fully addressed by the state.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you breaking all that down, and I know it definitely needs a longer discussion. But Negar, we really, really, really appreciate you coming on. Negar Mortazavi, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy and host of the Iran podcast. Your analysis is really unmatched. So thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to come back again.